Hello Richard, thank you for joining us today. So perhaps if you could tell us a bit about Crimson & Co and where you fit into the company.
Well, I'm Richard Powell. I'm the Managing Director of Crimson. Crimson is a management consultancy specialising in the end-to-end supply chain. So we focus on procurement, manufacturing, logistics, planning, and importantly, all of the different trade-offs in between. And everything we do is done with a view to the wider end-to-end supply chain context. So we work at board level and we work on the shop floor, ensuring that the changes stick. We tend to work with well-known international companies and we help them with supply chain strategies, improving their processes, reducing spend, also reducing exposure to cash, improving effectiveness in the business, responsiveness, the effectiveness of the people, consistency of performance, and generally moving our clients towards the best definition of supply chain excellence for them.
So how much interaction do you have in the pharma markets?
We work with most of the large pharma companies globally.
So what are the challenges then that are specific to the pharma supply chain?
I think that's a really interesting question, actually. I think what we're facing at the moment is that 80% of the world's population has not been addressed by the big pharma companies until now. So they've been addressed by other means, through generic producers and through FMCG companies with a wide portfolio of products. So there's going to be a new competitive landscape out there, which is going to be tough for the big pharma companies to break into, but also interesting for the existing players in that marketplace. So the question is, how do the big pharma companies cope with that challenge? And I think it's actually largely around the service model. There's probably service model and supply chain capabilities, but in terms of the service model, they need to understand how those markets work, the different market perceptions and preferences, the infrastructure in those markets, the routes to market, and also the competitive pressures. And then in terms of supply chain capabilities, they're actually competing against FMCG companies that have been doing this for an awful long time and have some very sophisticated supply chain techniques. So they need to ensure that they gain those supply chain capabilities fairly fast to be able to compete. I think the other thing to think about is in a highly regulated environment like pharma, which is different from most of FMCG, there are some other pressures that pharma companies face, largely around regulations and licensing. So how do companies deal with that? Well, the typical way over time has been to move responsibility to a more central sort of approach, central planning and central enforcement of controls. But actually, if you're approaching new markets, new emerging markets, or new markets to you, that's not necessarily the best way to deal with things, because it's usually the people at the sharp end that really understand what's driving success in those marketplaces. So there needs to be a shift in pharma companies, even acknowledging the importance of the controls that are required because of licensing, for licensing purposes, but a shift to really trusting people at the sharp end of the market who otherwise will have a fairly fatalistic, I can't really think about it, kind of view on life. And that's not the way to compete successfully with some of the big FMCG companies out there, or particularly in-market players.
So what would you, I know this is a question that could actually go on for hours as an answer, but perhaps in a nutshell, what would you say your recommendations are for overcoming margin and cost pressure to ensure a responsive and agile supply chain?
I think you can't have a different supply chain for every product in every market. That's not a cost-effective way of running a business. So there needs to be a way of balancing economies of scale with the diversity that is required to approach new markets and also to bring in new products in terms of product innovation. And the way to achieve this is some form of segmentation within a business. And that tends to be an answer that's been talked about for many years, and the question now is how to really make it work. And we've been working with clients on a wide-ranging, data-driven approach to doing just that, which enables segments to be created and prioritised and action plans put in place to ensure that the right segmentation is done within a business and is enforceable.
I know we already touched on this a little bit. You mentioned emerging markets, but what are the key challenges to pharma-specific logistics when working in those spaces?
I think the first one probably that occurs to people is the physical logistics challenge, but quite often that could be overdone. Sure, if you're putting vaccines that need to be kept at minus 20 degrees into the Central African Republic, then that would cause physical logistics challenges. But quite often in emerging markets, there are existing infrastructures in place that could also be tapped into that makes those problems resolvable. I think probably a bigger issue that businesses need to face is an understanding of the payment cycle in emerging markets. You don't get very far down the value chain before you have to fund your customer, and then your customer has to fund their customer. And so there needs to be an appreciation within a business that moving to an emerging market will have a cash impact. But also you get strange sales figures coming back because people are pumping the supply chain full of stock, and you get nominal sales because of that, but actually it's not real sales. So how do you really understand what's going on in that marketplace? And the fundamental answer to that is to have people in the sharp end who really understand the markets and to trust them.
So you actually did just mentioned temperature controlled supply chain. And when it comes to that cold chain continuity, what are your top tips for dealing with supply chain shocks, which of course are going to have a massive impact on your temperature controlled storage?
It's a big issue in pharma, which FMCG companies don't have to deal with. And I think the answer lies again around segmentation, but also about the depth of contingency planning. And so if you're making a flu vaccine that only has a time in market of sort of 4 to 6 weeks when it's going to be used, and you're building up the stocks during the year, and then a volcano erupts and there's an ash cloud that means that you can't get the product to market, that's obviously going to cause problems. So in those circumstances, there would be a high degree of priority put onto those products, and contingency planning would probably be thought about. But there are other products that need to be handled in different ways, and there could be ways in terms of segmentation that means that you put a different priority on different products at different times in different parts of the world. So I'm not sure there are any particular top tips for this. I think that's an issue, but it's certainly around depth and breadth of contingency planning. It's around ensuring that your suppliers have the ability to respond quickly, so there's a collaboration issue there as well.
Also, Crimson & Co, as we were saying earlier, they're an end-to-end supply chain consultancy. Is there a tendency then for companies to only look directly at the areas of supply chain that directly attach to their business, and maybe perhaps not so much ignore, but give less attention to the areas slightly more distant, but still very much involved in that chain?
That's definitely the case in some circumstances. And also you could say there's a legitimate need to focus on what you're really good at and make sure that's excellent. I think though, if people don't stand back and look at the wider value chain, there's a danger of sub-optimizing, and actually they'd be missing a trick. Because we talked before about segmentation, if your customer is segmenting their supply chain and will have to engage in different ways with different businesses in different parts of the world for different purposes, you need to understand that, because you need to know whether that's a threat to you as a business or an opportunity. And so I think the other way to look at it is that you need to be able to sort of stand back and look around the corner at what's going to hit you. So successful niche players are typically stand back and look at what the whole value chain is going to look like for the next 5 years, what the determinants of success would be in that value chain, and where the margin is going to be made. And then they can make some decisions about what part they want to play in it.
Finally, I just wanted to ask you about supply chain collaboration, because that's one thing that we hear a lot from a lot of people as a common trend, particularly in the pharma space. What really is the true definition, to your mind at least, of supply chain collaboration, and is it realistically achievable in the pharma space?
Oh, it's definitely achievable. It's a realistic aim. I'd say it's essential, in fact. I think people underestimate the amount of energy that's required to make it work, so they try a pilot that works very well, and then they have difficulty scaling that globally, which I think could be an issue. I think when we talked before about product innovation, time to market. Those products need to get to market quicker. There are new markets to be approached. There may be markets that businesses haven't got expertise in. And collaboration is part of a segmentation strategy, in fact, which allows businesses to do stuff in-house when they need to, and also to outsource when they need to. And in fact, there's an intriguing shift in pharma, but also in other industries, where previously logistics and customer fulfillment has been one of the first things to be outsourced. And actually now we see some of our clients talking about insourcing, so basically doing it themselves, customer fulfillment and logistics, because that's actually touching the customer, and maybe outsourcing the manufacturing side. So as long as things can be controlled in the right way, any part of a value chain or a supply chain could be outsourced. So I think that what we're moving to is a plug-and-play type system, basically, and businesses need to understand how they can quickly turn on and off third-party suppliers. So they need to get an understanding of that, and I think that's basically the way the business is going to be for the next 10 years or more.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time out to speak with us today, Richard. If people did want to find more about Crimson & Co, where can they go?
Website, crimsonandco.com, or join us at the conference.
And if you do want to attend the conference, or at least find out more, you can of course visit www.logipharmaeurope.com.